අද්විතීය 200 Mbps ස්පීඩ් එකකින් ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ වේගවත්ම සහ පුළුල්තම හෝම් බ්‍රෝඩ්බෑන්ඩ් සම්බන්ධතාවය වන SLT මොබිටෙල් දේශීය ෆයිබර් බලවේගය ඔබත් අදම අත්විඳින්න.
හරිම සුළුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Monday, the 20th of June 2023. Bill for budgets. The Parliamentary Budget Office bill presented in Parliament today passed with amendments without a vote. Mischief money. Justice Minister puts out strong legislation for asset declaration amongst politicos and commissioners.
අනාධිපති දෙන්නෝ ආණ්ඩුකාරවරු මහමැතිල තානාපතිල මහා කොමසාරිස් කොමිෂන් සභාවල කොමසාරිස්වරු මේ සියලු දෙනා අපි අලුතෙන් තමයි මේකට ඇතුළත්.
Reduce impact. CBSL Deputy Chief hopeful of minimal impact on economy following the domestic debt restructuring.
We are trying our best to ensure that the minimum impact is there.
Rights please. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights wants the Sri Lankan government to implement mandate holder recommendations.
I encourage the authorities to implement their recommendations.
Alliance Finance මෙතුරු රන්නයි සේවාවෙන් රන් පවුම්කට රුපියල් 1,70,000ක ඉහළ අධිකාරම. ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දෙනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
This is AdaDerana First at 9, live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and a warm welcome to today's edition of AdaDerana's English News First at 9. Let me take you to your top story. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, has called on the Sri Lankan government to implement the recommendations of the mandate holders of the United Nations Human Rights Council. He made these comments while delivering the global update during the 53rd session of the UNHRC. The UNHRC mandate holders are either an individual, also known as special rapporteurs, individual experts, or a working group of 5 members. Mandate holders serve in their personal capacities and they are not UN staff. They do not receive salaries or any other financial remuneration for their work.
The 53rd session of the United Nations Human Rights Council convened in Geneva yesterday. The sessions, which will continue for close to a month, is expected to conclude on the 14th of July. Delivering his global update, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk called on Sri Lanka to implement the recommendations of the mandate holders of the UN Rights Human Council.
In Sri Lanka, although the government has regrettably rejected aspects of the Council's resolutions related to accountability, it has continued to engage with our presence on the ground. Sri Lanka has received a dozen visits by mandate holders in the past decade, and I encourage the authorities to implement their recommendations.
President Ranil Wickremesinghe, currently on his official visit to the United Kingdom yesterday, held discussions with the Commonwealth Secretary-General Patricia Scotland. The focus on the discussion fell on the digitisation programmes, measures to broaden the Commonwealth's partnerships, as well as the Commonwealth programmes to enhance support to member countries. Following his visit to the United Kingdom, President Wickremesinghe is also expected to visit France to attend an international summit for a new global financing pact, where he will also address a high-level panel discussion. During his official visit to the United Kingdom, President Ranil Wickremesinghe yesterday called on the Commonwealth Secretary-General Patricia Scotland at the Marlborough House, the headquarters of the Commonwealth of Nations and the seat of the Commonwealth Secretariat in Westminster, London. During the meeting, the Sri Lankan head of state discussed the digitisation programmes within the Commonwealth, measures to broaden the Commonwealth's partnerships, as well as Commonwealth programmes such as Commonwealth for Climate and the Blue Charter to enhance support to member countries. According to the President's media division, President Wickremesinghe also shared his strategies for addressing climate change and explored the potential involvement of the Commonwealth in these efforts. Following his visit to the United Kingdom, President Wickremesinghe is also set to visit France to attend the highly anticipated Global Leaders Summit for a new global financing pact. The event, scheduled to take place at the Palais Brongniart in Paris on the 22nd and 23rd of June, aims to address pressing challenges faced by the world today. The summit is expected to shape a new financing toolbox that will be rolled out through 6 high-level roundtables and 40 parallel events. It will provide the opportunity to examine interactions between multilateral development bank reforms, mobilization of private capital, climate finance, green infrastructure, and set the stage for new agreements to relieve debt distress. On the invitation of his French counterpart, President Ranil Wickremesinghe will address a high-level panel discussion at the summit. Further, the head of state is also expected to meet with Paris Club creditors to discuss matters pertaining to restructuring debt during his stay in France. In Parliament today, the Parliamentary Budget Office Bill presented for the establishment of the Parliamentary Budget Office was passed today with amendments and without a vote. During the second reading of the bill, SJB parliamentarian Kabir Hashim proposed that the government include a monitoring and evaluation unit in the new Budget Office. The new Budget Office that is planned to be established will thus ensure that targets pertaining to transparency and accountability are achieved. In response, State Minister of Finance Shehan Semasinghe said discussions with regard to the establishment of such a unit will be held with the President following the conclusion of his visit to Europe.
For promoting good governance and fiscal transparency, the legislature's active engagement in the budget process becomes essential. I would like to recommend that in addition to the Parliamentary Budget Office providing budget analysis, independent advice to parliamentarians, policy costing to party leaders and MPs, and that they also focus on the following. As you said, you all will add it up in the rules and regulations. It would be good for the Parliamentary Budget Office to assist MPs to prepare and indulge in a pre-budget discussion sufficiently early before the budget itself so that they are engaged in the budget process. I recommend that we propose a medium-term budgetary framework for 3 years to be submitted to the Parliamentary Budget Office with every budget so that the MPs can look at the progress and the path ahead and how they can make necessary changes if it is necessary. I propose to include a monitoring and evaluation unit within the Budget Office, what we are going to approve today, because then we will strengthen it. We will be able to make sure that we are achieving those targets about transparency and about accountability. The monitoring and evaluation unit in the Parliamentary Budget Office can review any ongoing public sector project or any new project proposals, and the monitoring and evaluation unit could work with the Department of Project Management and Monitoring as partner or a secretariat and could commission project evaluations, mid-term evaluations and post-evaluations which could guide both Parliament and Cabinet on which public projects should be prioritised and which should be scrapped.
On the evaluation draft what you were talking about, we have had informal discussions also. Upon arrival of the President after he concludes his visit of France and UK, we will call for a meeting and we'll see how best we could accommodate that draft which has been done earlier.
In certain texts at the preamble it says it will be an independent body, and somewhere down the line it will say it's an independent institute, and then again it says it will be an independent entity. What do we mean by these things? What do we mean by these things? I think it is better for us to stop here and ask those prevailing and important questions. Otherwise, we may run into another Janaka Ratnayaka drama where the whole nation is losing trust between the citizen and the state. So at this point, when we are debating the second reading of this bill, I would urge all parties concerned to make that clarification, at least as a footnote, at least as an annexure. What do we mean by this body being independent? Because financial disciplines is fundamental. We need to know. So this parliamentary office need to be independent as we explain that and define that, and then also to be professional enough to understand what this country needs by 2030, 2040, 2050.
In other news, Minister of Justice Dr. Vijayadasa Rajapaksa states that the new Anti-Corruption Bill empowers the Bribery Commission to take legal action after investigating asset declarations of the parties mentioned per the Act. This includes parliamentarians if they have accrued any ill-gotten gains. Addressing a media briefing today, the Justice Minister confirmed that new categories including governors, chief ministers, ambassadors, high commissioners and commissioners of independent commissions will now be held responsible to declare their assets and liabilities under the new Act.
පහුගිය කාලේ අපි රටේ ආර්ථික බිඳවැටීමත් එක්ක ප්‍රධානම චෝදනාව තිබුණේ දේශපාලඥයෝ, මහජන නියෝජිතයෝ, රාජ්‍ය සේවකයෝ දූෂිතයි. මෙවන් පරිසරයක තමයි අපි මේ දූෂණ විරෝධී පනත ගෙනාවේ. බත්කම් සහ බැරකම් ප්‍රකාශන පනත සිරිමාව බණ්ඩාරනායක මැතිණියගේ කාලේ සකස් කරපු එකක්. තමන්ගේ ප්‍රකාශන හදලා ජනාධිපතිට බාර දෙනවා, මන්ත්‍රීලා කතානායකතුමාට බාර දෙනවා, රාජ්‍ය නිලධාරීන් අංශ ප්‍රධානීන්ට බාර දෙනවා. ඒවා සීල් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒකක් ලබා නොදුන්නත් අධිකරණයෙන් රුපියල් 1000ක දඩයක් තියෙනවා. එතකොට ඒකට යටත් නැති බොහෝ කණ්ඩායම් ඉන්නවා. ඒ කණ්ඩායම් සියල්ල අපි මේකට ඇතුල් කරලා තියෙන අපි ඒක පටන් අරන් තියෙන ජනාධිපති. ජනාධිපතිත් දෙන්න ඕනේ. ආණ්ඩුකාරවරු, මහඇමතිලා, තානාපතිලා, මහා කොමසාරිස්ලා, කොමිෂන් සභාවල කොමසාරිස්වරු මේ සියලු දෙනා අපි අලුතෙන් තමයි මේකට ඇතුල්. එතකොට මීට පස්සේ දෙන එක සීල් කරලා පෙට්ටිය වහලා තියන්නේ නැහැ. ඒක පරීක්ෂා කරලා බලන්න බලය තියෙනවා අල්ලස් කොමිෂමට. එතකොට ඒවායේ යම් වත්කම් වල වෙනසක් වීමක් තිබෙනවා නම් පරීක්ෂණ පවත්වලා අයිතු ලෙස උපයා ගැනීම තියෙනවා නම් ඒවට විරුද්ධව නීතිය ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්නත් බලය තියෙනවා.
The Colombo Magistrates Court today ordered the Criminal Investigation Department to take measures to expedite investigations into the death of businessman Dinesh Shafter. Colombo Additional Magistrate Rajendra Jayasuriya ordered the CID to obtain from the government analyst all relevant reports pertaining to samples sent for testing. Emphasizing the delay in receiving the reports in relation to the investigation, the additional magistrate stated in open court that she is ready to summon the government analyst before the court if required. The analyst is due to be called in to court on the 28th of June. In other local news, bus drivers of private buses operating on 4 routes continued their strike for a second straight day today. The strike action was in protest of the decision to deploy a luxury bus on the route which runs from Piliandala to Peta through Kottava and Borella. In other news, buses with excessive decorations have been warned to remove extra paraphernalia as it directly resulted in an increase in accidents. With that, let's take a look at the other developments around the island in brief.
Bus drivers of private buses functioning on 4 routes continued their strike for the second consecutive day today against the decision of deploying a luxury bus. The drivers of the private buses further added that the numbers of passengers coming to their bus has dropped following the deployment of the new bus. However, the chairman of the Western Province Road Passenger Transport Authority declared that the luxury bus operated with the aim of providing the public with a higher quality of service will not halt its operations under any circumstance. Meanwhile, 5 army personnel were injured this morning in a tragic road accident on the Colombo-Kandy main road. A fuel bowser had collided head-on with a vehicle transporting army personnel from the Polhengoda camp en route to the Giritale camp. The army personnel were rushed to the Watapitiwala hospital for medical attention while the driver of the bowser was arrested. In the meantime, buses with unnecessary decorations are legally prohibited due to the increase in number of accidents reported as a result of such extravagances. As such, 12 such buses were identified yesterday in Kurunagala by the Kurunagala Traffic Police Division. The drivers of the respective buses were strictly advised to remove all decorations within 10 days with the threat that those buses could be suspended completely. Meanwhile, the government has launched a program to provide e-vehicle licenses as special incentives to workers who send foreign money through legal channels. This comes in the wake of encouraging forex inflows in the first 5 months of 2023 as opposed to the status of 2022.
Country Manager of the International Finance Corporation calls for transparency in awarding contracts for investments. This and more news after a short commercial break. Stay with us.
ගොඩමඩ පෙරලි කරන බලපුළුවන්කාරයා මහින්ද්‍රා යුවෝ ඩීමෝ වෙතින්. වැඩම ගොඩයි ගොඩම තමයි. ස්වරාජ් ට්‍රැක්ටර් ඩීමෝ වෙතින්. අබාස් මිලගණන් දැවන්ත ලෙස අඩු කළා. TV, ෆ්‍රිජ්, AC, වොෂින් මැෂින්, ලැප්ටොප්, ජංගම දුරකථන මුළු තැන්ගේ උපකරණ ඇතුළු නිෂ්පාදන රැසක් අඩුම මිලට අබාස් වෙතින් පමණයි.
ඒ ත්‍රිත්වයේ තහවුරු කළ විශිෂ්ටත්වය දුෂ්‍යන්ත මහබදුගේ චරිත දිසානායක සමිතරත් නායක සිසිජි නුගේගොඩ ගම්පහ
Physics නිලන්ත ජයසූරිය නවපන්ති ආරම්භය සුසිපුවන් ගම්පහ සීලින් බෙන් නුගේගොඩ සයන්ස් සෙන්ටර් ගාල්ල
පහනුවර කුරුණෑගල කෑකල්ල අංකකේ භෞතික විද්‍යා පාඨමාලාව නුගේගොඩද අතික්‍රමණය කළ වගයි ෆිසික්ස් දර්ශන ඔකුවෙල
තනිව යන ගමනට නිවැරදි ගිණුම් කරන මග හේමාල් පෙරේරා
Welcome back. Senior Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Yvette Fernando, assured that steps will be taken by the country's monetary authority to ensure that minimum impact is felt on the country's economy from the domestic debt restructuring. She made these comments participating in a panel discussion on business and financial recovery in line with the Global Economic Forum, organized by Women in Management. Meanwhile, country manager of the International Finance Corporation, Alejandro Alvarez de la Campa, highlighted the lack of land availability and transparency in awarding contracts as factors that are preventing the flow of foreign direct investments into the country. Deputy High Commissioner of Australia to Sri Lanka, Lalita Kapoor, also highlighted the need for a regulatory framework that encourages foreign investments into the country.
How you observe Sri Lanka's present economic outlook going forward?
We see some turnaround at this moment, but of course I want to reiterate, if that is to be a sustainable one, still we'll have to go through some more kind of hard time and see that these policy measures are consistently and continuously driven towards the achieving the expected outcome. Currently, we are facing this uncertainty about domestic debt restructuring. And in order to ensure the Sri Lanka's debt is sustainable, the external debt also wants the domestic debt also to be restructured in some manner. We are trying our best to ensure that the minimum impact is there, especially ensuring the banking system stability, financial system stability, and minimizing the social impact. Within the next 1 month or so, this will get resolved. And once that happens, we will see a good kind of business environment that will facilitate the businesses.
Once there's a crisis, what you want to do is evaluate first why you are in that crisis, what has happened. It's important to calm everyone, look at mindset, and begin to see how they can now restore confidence back by ensuring that they action what they have decided they want to do.
What strategically we need to address in order to create that conducive environment for FDI?
FDI has been declining in Sri Lanka in the last few years. We believe that one of the important elements of growth will be to bring more FDI into the country, so that there's a clear need to go back to levels of FDI that can reach the previous years. There are a number of elements, I think, that are preventing investors from coming and investing in Sri Lanka at the moment. When you have a country in default, investment banks and foreign investors will look into countries that have a more macro favorable environment. There are a number of regulatory issues as well. So, for example, the current investment code is not as conducive as it should be to bring foreign investors on things like land availability. So this is one area where the government should work more efficiently in making land available to foreign investors. I think the lack of a PPP framework and transparent processes for awarding contracts is also an issue that prevents foreign investors from coming. That's why, for example, in the renewable energy space or infrastructure development in general, there hasn't been a lot of foreign investment done because of the tendency of the government to cater to unsolicited bids rather than doing transparent processes for awarding contracts to private investors. So,
how Sri Lanka can move ahead with pacts that actually support and enhance Sri Lanka's connectivity with the rest of the region?
Tariffs are very high in this country. It really impedes growth. It means that businesses here find it much harder to import products that they would need, inputs that they would need in order to produce and then perhaps export themselves. That's quite an obvious one, you might think, but I know that the President has spoken about Sri Lanka joining some of the big free trade agreement blocks, some of which Australia is part of as well. And I can say it's not easy negotiating trade agreements, and they don't come for free. So usually you have to negotiate to reduce your own tariffs in order to get access to other countries' markets. And that would be the case for Sri Lanka as well. But I think in the short term that there are a lot of clear obstacles to trade. So you've got the tariffs there, but you've also got non-tariff barriers. Other areas that Sri Lanka could look at to develop its domestic market, including to help those companies that might then be able to export in the future, would just to look at the regulations and also the difficulties that even foreign investors have coming into Sri Lanka. We know that you want to attract a lot of foreign investment into the country, but it's very difficult, and it's partly to do with transparency. So if there's one thing I would say about crises and what can countries do coming out of crises, you might not be surprised to hear me say this, I think there's quite a role for government here and transparency. So when I say government, I'm also talking about institutions, and how does, say, for instance, your Board of Investment or your Ministry of Commerce, how do they work together to try and enable investment? So what kind of environment do you have here? Is it one that facilitates investment, that welcomes investment? At the moment, we would have to say, if we're being honest, it's not a very easy environment for foreign investors to come into.
In other news, the government has raised the tax on imported cement with effect from the 17th of June. The Ministry of Investment Promotion said that the cess levy on a kilogram of artificially coloured or uncoloured cement has been raised from 3 rupees to 5 rupees. The cess on other Portland cement imported in packages of 50 kilograms and below has been increased to 8 rupees. The cess tariff on other Portland cement imported in packages of over 50 kilograms or bulk is raised to 5 rupees from its current tax of 3 rupees. The All Ceylon Bakery Association, Owners Association, has decided to reduce the price of bakery products. Accordingly, a 450-gram loaf of bread will be reduced by 10 rupees. Further, the prices of other bakery products too have been reduced by 10 rupees each. The price reduction comes into effect at midnight today. In stocks news, Sri Lanka shares closed lower today, dragged down by losses in financial and consumer staple stocks. The Colombo Stock Exchange All-Share Price Index closed 0.24% down at 9,159 points. The ASPI, Sampath Bank PLC and Cargill's PLC were the top losers, falling 26% and 17% respectively. That's 2.6% and 1.7% respectively. Sri Lanka Telecom PLC and Dialog Asiata PLC were among the top gainers in the index, rising 4.4% and 3% respectively. Meanwhile, trading volume rose to 56.1 million shares from 29.9 million shares in the previous session. The equity market's turnover rose to 923.3 million rupees from 580 million rupees in the previous session. The telecommunication service sector was the top contributor to market turnover, whilst the materials sector was the second highest contributor. Foreign investors were net buyers in the equity market, purchasing shares worth 73.7 million rupees, while domestic investors were net sellers, offloading shares worth 918.8 million rupees. Now let's have a look at how the rupee traded against other major currencies during the day. Global oil prices slipped today after China cut benchmark lending rates less than expected, while demand was seen rising this year, clouding the outlook for the world's largest crude importer. Russia is meanwhile set to increase seaborne diesel and gas oil exports this month, outweighing cuts by the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and its allies, including Moscow itself.
Brent crude was up 0.6% at $76.56 a barrel, while US West Texas Intermediate crude futures were down 13 cents and $71.65. Meanwhile, China today cut two benchmark lending rates by 10 basis points each. The cuts, the first in 10 months, were less aggressive than some forecasts. According to a researcher at China National Petroleum Corporation's research arm, China's 2023 crude oil demand is still expected to rise by 3.5%. Markets also await testimony from US Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell later in the week for future rate clues. Higher interest rates reduce appetite for spending and can drive down global oil demand. On the supply side, Iran's crude exports and oil output have hit new highs in 2023 despite US sanctions.
That's all the news I have for you this evening. I'm Jonathan Benedict and it was a pleasure to have you. Do join us again tomorrow at the same time, first at 9, Sri Lanka's premier English news channel. For now, good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.